In the last video, we started this Getting Started Configuration wizard in Netbackup in order to move from the installation portion to the point where we can actually back up something. We successfully completed configuring storage devices, which in our case is a tape drive within a robotic tape library, and which involves setting up a storage unit, and we will get into more details about that later, but basically we follow the defaults and chose to set up a storage unit for the single tape drive that we had, and that would be sufficient for now. Now we move on to configuring volumes. So I'm going to hit next, which brings up this sub-wizard. It inventories robot volumes for media that it discovered. And we're going to hit next. It's loading data. Select the device for volume configuration. So we're going to select this and hit next. And it gives us this warning. It'll create volumes on the tape, so we'll just take the defaults and hit next. It's loading data. And here we have the robot inventory. View the results of the inventory. And it logically added new media. It found no barcodes, and it identified the various slots in the library. If we had barcodes, it should read the barcodes and list them here under the media ID. Currently, this configuration of A0000 to A0001 and so on is the default media ID pattern that Netbackup uses to label the tapes within the Netbackup software database if it does not identify a barcode. And so it says volume configuration successfully updated. So let's go ahead and hit next on that. Identify cleaning media. We did not insert cleaning media in any of these, so I'm going to skip this and say next. You have successfully completed volume configuration. You may now modify it within the wizard. I'll go ahead and hit finish. And then I will move on to step 3, configure the catalog. And it says welcome to the catalog backup. And so I will move quickly through this catalog section and create a new catalog backup policy. And so we should call this something like the policy type determines the type of clients that can be backed up by this policy. So let's just call it cat back test and hit next. Backup type, let's go ahead and say full backup for now and hit next. And we'll use the default schedule to do a full backup at once a week and the retention period for 2 weeks. Let's hit next. This is very useful in scheduling off hours between 6 p.m. in the evening and 5 a.m. so it doesn't clutter your network with backup traffic. Since we're just testing, we'll just leave it at all day and hit next. And specify a file location to save the disaster recovery information. We could probably say user openv, and we will use the default root account for this. The disaster recovery file generated for each catalog backup contains information needed to recover the Netbackup catalog. So this is not necessary for restoring your actual data, but if Netbackup itself was to get damaged, it would need this catalog to identify the tapes. It says there was a write access problem to make sure there's write permission, and I could choose no and go back to fix this to a new location or new account, but since this is not absolutely essential at this point, we're going to go ahead and skip this for now. And I definitely don't recommend you doing that in your production environment. So I'll say yes and move on. It wants to know if mail should be configured for notification. We'll say no at this point and hit next and finish. Next. Finish. And we've actually completed 3 of the 4 steps before we could do a backup. So let's on step 4 click next and see if we could quickly finish this. So the backup policy determines which clients to back up, what data to back up, when to back it up, and where to store it. Typically you would need backup client software installed on all the clients you'd like to back up, but since we haven't done that yet, we could back up the server itself, which is itself a client by default. So let's go ahead and call this full NB server back and hit next. And let's click on add, and we see the hardware name is Linux Red Hat. That's close enough to the hardware and operating system type, and we'll type in the client which we want to back up, which in this case is the server itself. So the server is a client of itself. It's a little tricky, but that'll do for now. And let's hit next. And let's say backup all drives. Or alternatively, we could have specified just particular file or folder. Let's go ahead and do a full backup and hit next. We'll take the default schedule and retention. We'll leave this at all day and hit finished. And that's it. We've actually moved from the point of installation to configuration and finally creating a backup policy. And it's asking me if I'd like to create another backup policy. I'll say no. And in the Getting Started wizard, we've seen, with the exception of a few Unix problems, which we've resolved most of them to get to a point where we could actually do a backup, we went through these 4 key areas, and now we could say next and finish. And that's it. In the next video, we'll actually take a backup and then see if we could restore it.